Throughout African history, many military leaders and political officials have been renowned for their brutal policies, harsh treatment of civilians, and their murderous campaigns. Most surprisingly, some of the worst African dictators did not even have to overthrow for power. It was given to them. Many African leaders take office as a democratic leader, but oftentimes the hunger for power drives them to become dictators. Many Africans died at the hands of these brutal despots. In this episode, we shall be looking at some of the worst dictators Africans have ever seen. Number 5. Charles Taylor of Liberia. Charles Taylor served as president of Liberia from 1997 to 2003, following his victory in a bloody civil war. Charles Taylor supported the 1980 Liberian coup d'etat led by Samuel Doe, which resulted in the murder of the then president of Liberia, William Tolbert, and the takeover of power by Samuel Doe. Charles Taylor was appointed to the position of Director General of General Services Agency, a position that left him in charge of purchasing for the Liberian government. He was sacked in 1983 for embezzling an estimate of $1 million. Charles Taylor fled to the United States but was arrested in 1984 and was held on a warrant for extradition to face charges of embezzlement in Liberia. In 1985, Charles Taylor allegedly escaped from prison in the United States. Charles Taylor then fled to Libya to undergo guerrilla training under Muammar Gaddafi. In 1989, Charles Taylor led an uprising from Ivory Coast into Liberia to overthrow the government of Samuel Doe, beginning a 7-year civil war that killed 200,000 people. After the civil war, he was elected president of Liberia as he threatened to resume fighting if he lost the democratic election. His famous campaign slogan was "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." During his presidency, he was alleged to have been involved directly in the Sierra Leone Civil War. He was accused of aiding rebels fighting in the Sierra Leone Civil War during the 1990s by trading weapons for diamonds. He was charged with supporting atrocities against humanity and the use of child soldiers in the Sierra Leone Civil War. Following widespread international condemnation, Charles Taylor agreed to go into exile in Nigeria. In August 2003, Charles Taylor resigned from the presidency after being pressured by the United States government. Charles Taylor flew to Nigeria, where the Nigerian government provided houses for him and his entourage. In 2006, the Liberian government submitted an official request to Nigeria for Charles Taylor's extradition. Charles Taylor tried to flee Nigeria but was quickly captured. He was later charged in the International Criminal Court with crimes against humanity and war crimes committed during the Sierra Leone Civil War. In 2012, after years of trial, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Number 4. General Sani Abacha of Nigeria. Sani Abacha was a Nigerian military dictator who served as head of state and commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria from 1993 to 1998. Sani Abacha ruled Nigeria with an iron fist, and his regime is one of the most controversial in Nigeria's history. Although his regime saw economic growth, it also witnessed widespread human rights abuses. He is known for his brutal repression and corruption. He was known as a man of few words and deadly actions. He demonstrated this as head of state with one of the most brutal regimes Nigerians has ever had. In 1994, he issued a decree that placed his government above the jurisdiction of the courts, which gave him absolute power. Another decree gave him the right to detain anyone for up to 3 months without trial. His regime recorded human rights abuses and several political assassinations. There was a massive crackdown on the media, civil rights groups, and pro-democracy campaigns. During his regime, it is estimated that he and his family members stole billions of dollars from the states, and he oversaw a level of unprecedented state-directed violence. Most notably captured in the execution of peaceful environmental rights activist Ken Saro-Wiwa on a trump-up charges. Sani Abacha's regime suffered opposition externally from pro-democracy activists. Early in 1998, Abacha announced that elections will be held that August, with a view towards handing over power to a civilian government in October. It soon became apparent that Abacha had no intention of permitting an honest election. By April, he had strong-armed the country's 5 political parties into endorsing him as the sole presidential candidate. Sani Abacha died in June 1998. In 2004, he was listed as the 4th most corrupt leader in history. Number 3. Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was once the longest reigning dictator in both the Arab world and Africa after having spent 42 years in power. Gaddafi ruled Libya from 1969 to 2011. As a colonel in 1969, Gaddafi led a group of military officers in a military coup that overthrew King Idris. The monarchy was abolished and a republic was proclaimed. Gaddafi stockpiled chemical weapons while he was in power. and he was accused of supporting terrorist networks throughout the world in the 1970s and 1980s. In 1984, Gaddafi had a 30-year-old student publicly executed by hanging in a basketball stadium. In 1986, Gaddafi was implicated in the bombing of a Berlin discotheque that killed 3 people and injured over 200 people, prompting the administration of United States President Reagan to launch airstrikes against Libya. Gaddafi was also blamed for the 1988 Lockerbie bombing, which killed 270 people when their plane exploded over Scotland. During its regime, thousands of Libyans went missing. In June 1996, over 1,200 Libyan prisoners were killed. Libya fought wars against Egypt, Chad, and Tanzania under Gaddafi. In February 2011, major protests broke out against Gaddafi's government. The demonstration soon converted into a nationwide protest against Gaddafi's rule. Gaddafi responded by saying that the rebels will be hunted street by street, house by house, and wardrobe by wardrobe. And truly, Gaddafi responded with deadly crackdowns. An armed conflict erupted between Gaddafi's loyal forces and opposition groups. The different opposition groups united to form the National Transition Council. The council was quickly recognized by the international community, and it was backed by NATO. During the conflict, Gaddafi is said to have provided Viagra-like drugs to his soldiers for the purpose of raping women as a form of intimidation. It is also said that Gaddafi ordered the killing of peaceful civilians in an attempt to stop the revolution. Muammar Gaddafi was killed in October 2011. Number 2, General Idi Amin of Uganda. Well, I guess Idi Amin is someone that doesn't need too much introduction, as he is one of the most famous dictators and warlords ever seen in Africa, and he is one of the worst dictators of the last 20th century. Idi Amin was the commander of the Ugandan army when he seized power in a military coup in 1971, and he ruled Uganda for 8 years from 1971 to 1979, during which time he earned the nickname the Butcher of Uganda for his brutality. Initially, Idi Amin said he was not a politician and will only stay in power until free and fair elections were held. But only a week later, Idi Amin declared himself President of Uganda, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Uganda Army Chief of Staff and Chief of Air Staff, and he suspended numerous parts of the Ugandan constitution. Idi Amin placed military tribunals above the system of civil law and appointed soldiers to top government posts. Idi Amin ruled by decree, and over the course of his rule, Idi Amin issued approximately 30 decrees. Idi Amin engaged in ethnic purging of the Akoli and Lango people in the army and throughout Uganda. In 1972, Uganda living in exile attempted a coup against Idi Amin. Though the coup failed, but it made him paranoid. He retaliated against the ethnic groups that the rebels belonged to. Thousands were killed or disappeared. During his regime, thousands of Ugandans got disappeared. Idi Amin was constantly paranoid about being overthrown. Idi Amin left a mark on the wall by using his infamous killer squads to murder opponents and their families. He showed no mercy to anyone. There were lots of public executions, and dead bodies were dumped in a river. The scariest thing about Idi Amin was his ability to change from a gentleman to an incredible angry person with no provocation. Another scary thing about Idi Amin is that he was said to be a cannibal. In 1972, Idi Amin drove out 50,000 Ugandans' Asian population who were British passport holders. He then took the properties and businesses of the Asians and Europeans and gave them to his followers. And he spent large amounts of money on the military, both of which led to the country's economic decline. In 1977, the United Kingdom broke diplomatic relations with Uganda and decided to close its embassy in Uganda because of Idi Amin's oppression. Idi Amin declared that he had single-handedly defeated the British Empire. It is estimated that 300 to 500,000 people were killed under his regime. In 1979, Idi Amin was overthrown in a military invasion launched from Tanzania. He was granted asylum in Libya, and he later died in Saudi Arabia in 2003. Number 1, Francisco Macias Onguema of Equatorial Guinea. Francisco Onguema is without doubt one of the craziest and frankly evil dictators to ever come to power. Francisco Onguema served as first president of Equatorial Guinea from 1968 to 1979. Onguema was known to be very repressive and ruthless due to the fact that he genocided most of the native population. He was known to order entire families and villages executed. Although democratically elected to power fairly in 1968, he soon set about cementing his power by making himself dictator. The military and presidential guard were entirely controlled by Onguema's relatives and clan members, and those were the country's instruments of repression. Onguema mostly filled out his inner circle with family members such as Teodoro Obiang Onguema Basongo, who was his nephew. Onguema suffered from extreme paranoia. As time went on, Onguema ordered the mass murder of government ministers, members of National Assembly, and even members of his own family. In 1969, Onguema arrested his own foreign minister on treason charges and executed him by throwing him out of a window. On Christmas Eve 1969, about 150 of his political opponents were executed by shooting in a stadium, and 36 others were ordered to dig ditches in which they were buried up to their necks and eaten alive by red ants. Onguema was known to order entire villages destroyed just to eliminate one suspected dissident. Onguema's prisons were notorious for human rights abuses. Prisoners were humiliated, starved, tortured, and murdered without due process. Prisoners sentenced to death were usually beaten to death with wooden clubs, and female prisoners were subjected to rape, often in front of their husbands. Onguema's regime often imprisoned entire families, including the spouses and children of suspected dissidents. In May 1971, Onguema issued a decree that granted him all direct powers of government and institutions, including powers formerly held by legislative and judiciary branches, as well as the cabinet ministers. In October 1971, Onguema imposed a death penalty as punishment for anyone threatening the president or the government. Insulting or offending the president or his cabinet was punishable by 30 years in prison. A presidential decree combined all political parties in the country into Onguema's political party, with Onguema as president for life. Onguema was a very paranoid man. Intellectuals and skilled professionals were a particular target. He outlawed spectacles under death penalty, banned the use of the word intellectual, and destroyed all boats in order to stop people fleeing from his rule. He declared private education subversive and banned it entirely in 1975. He also banned Western medicines, stating that they were un-African. Onguema eventually outlawed Christianity and used the slogan "There is no other God than Messiah," and this was sometimes claimed to be the national motto. Owning anything related to Christianity became a reason for imprisonment due to alleged support for anti-government or coup plots. After killing the governor of the central bank, he carried everything that remained in the national treasury to his villa in his own village. By the end of his regime, nearly all of the country's educated class was either executed or forced into exile. 2/3 of the legislature and 10 of his original ministers were also killed or had been disappeared. By 1979, Onguema's government had gathered condemnation from the United Nations and European Commission, and that same year, Onguema organized the execution of various members of his own family, leading various members of his inner circle to fear that he was no longer acting rationally. Of a population estimated at between 300 to 400,000 people, nearly 80,000 people were killed under his regime. In August 1979, Onguema was overthrown by his nephew Theodoro Obiang Onguema Basongo, whose brother was among those executed. On the 29th of September 1979, Onguema was executed by a firing squad after being sentenced to death 101 times. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos.